Welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at a really interesting document.
Okay.
It's a manual for recovery officers in India.
Sure.
So kind of like a detective's handbook, but instead of chasing criminals, they're chasing outstanding dues,
Makes sense.
especially related to the Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1952.
Interesting.
Now, I know what you might be thinking.
What's that?
Provident Funds? That sounds kind of dry.
Yeah.
But trust me, this deep dive is going to take you behind the scenes of a system that's all about ensuring financial security for workers.
Okay.
And what happens when employers don't play by the rules.
All right. Sounds good. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one.
Yeah, and it's a system with a really long history, too.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning.
Sure.
How did this whole recovery process even get started?
Well, back in the early days when the Employees Provident Funds Ordinance was first established,
Okay.
that was in 1951, the recovery of these dues was treated pretty much like collecting land revenue.
Oh, wow.
It was a very general approach and wasn't tailored to the nuances of employee funds.
I bet that wasn't very effective.
You're right.
Land revenue is a whole different thing than employee funds.
Yeah, it was really inefficient.
Okay.
And because of that, it led to a pretty big change.
What was that?
Well, in 1988, when the act was amended to create a new role,
Okay.
the recovery officer.
Interesting.
This was a huge turning point because it showed that they needed people who really knew what they were doing in this area.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the creation of this role really shows how important it was to protect those funds.
Exactly.
It's not just lumped in with other types of revenue.
Right.
So what were some of the key powers and responsibilities they gave to these recovery officers?
Well, the amendment outlined a pretty clear structure for how the whole recovery system would work.
Okay.
At the very top, you've got the Central Provident Fund Commissioner, who's in charge of the whole operation. And then you've got a specific recovery division.
Dirk?
This is led by an additional Central Provident Fund Commissioner, so they're providing like focused leadership. And then finally, you have the recovery officers themselves. These are the RPFCs and APFCs who work in field offices all over the country.
So they're the ones on the ground doing the work.
Exactly. They're the ones directly interacting with employers and making sure everyone's following the rules.
And they have enforcement officers to help them out, right?
You got it. It's definitely a team effort.
So what kind of things are they responsible for?
A lot, actually. They have to do everything from sending notices to people who haven't paid, to conducting investigations,
Yeah.
to even attaching and selling property to get the money back.
Okay, so hold on.
Yeah.
When you say attaching property, what does that even mean?
Well, think of those crime shows.
Okay.
They put a seizure notice on like a fancy car or something.
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of like that. But in this case, it can apply to both movable and immovable property.
So like what kinds of things?
So movable property would include things like vehicles or office equipment, even bank accounts. Things that can be directly seized by the recovery officer.
So they can actually take those things.
Yes, they have the power to do that.
Wow.
It might seem serious, but it's really important to make sure that the money is recovered.
Okay, so what about immovable property?
Well, that would be things like land or buildings.
Okay.
It works a little differently. For those, they don't immediately seize them. Instead, they issue an order saying that the person who owes the money can't transfer or charge the property.
Okay.
And then they make this order public, they proclaim it, and actually physically attach it to the property itself.
Oh, wow. So like a big warning sign.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
So is that just for transparency or is there more to it?
Well, transparency is definitely a big part of it, but it also serves as a legal notice,
Okay.
like to anyone who might want to buy the property.
Okay.
Or to creditors, so that everyone knows that there are these recovery proceedings going on.
So the person who owes money can't just secretly sell it off.
Exactly. It's all about protecting everyone's interests.
That's actually really clever.
Yeah, it's a good system.
So once a property is attached like that, what happens next?
Well, it doesn't immediately go up for sale.
Yeah.
There's a whole process.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
There are specific procedures and timeframes that are laid out in the manual.
Okay.
This is to make sure everything is fair and that the person owing money has a chance to fix the situation.
So it's not just about grabbing assets and calling it a day.
Not at all.
It seems like they put a lot of thought into making sure it's done properly.
Yeah, they really did.
So what does that process look like?
Well, once they've attached the property, The next step is to try and recover the money by selling that property.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, there's a specialized process.
Okay.
It has to be transparent and accessible. So the main way they do it is through a public auction.
A public auction.
Yeah, anyone can come and bid on the property.
Okay, so it's very open.
Exactly.
But what if nobody shows up or the bids are too low?
Well, the manual has thought of that too.
Okay.
While the public auction is the preferred way to go,
Yeah.
they can also do private sales in certain cases.
Oh, interesting.
Like if the property is really specialized or if the auction doesn't get good enough bids,
Okay.
the recovery officer can explore selling it privately to make sure they get a fair price.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It seems like they've thought of every scenario.
They really tried to.
What about the person who owes the money?
The defaulter.
Yeah. Do they have any say in all of this?
They do have some rights and opportunities to try to intervene during the process.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, they can challenge the attachment order itself
Oh.
if they think it was issued incorrectly or if they have a good reason why it shouldn't have happened.
So it's not just a done deal?
Nope.
Okay, what else?
They can also try to negotiate a settlement.
Oh, right, to try and avoid going any further.
Exactly.
So it's not like they're completely powerless once things get started.
Right.
There's room for them to speak up and maybe even resolve it before it gets to a sale.
Yeah, the manual really emphasizes fairness and due process.
Okay.
It wants to make sure that anyone who's accused of owing money has the chance to present their side of the story.
That's great.
Yeah,
And to maybe find other solutions.
exactly.
Wow, this is way more complicated than I thought.
It's a pretty intricate system.
It really is. It seems like they tried to carefully balance the need to get the money back,
Yeah.
but also to protect people's rights.
It's a delicate balance for sure.
It's really clear that a lot of thought went into creating this manual.
Definitely.
It's not just about brute force collection.
Yep.
It's a much more nuanced approach that takes into account all the complexities of these situations.
Absolutely.
It's really impressive.
It really is. It's a very structured and procedural approach.
Yeah, I'm really starting to see how it balances legal rigor with practical considerations.
Exactly.
So walk me through what that process actually looks like.
Okay.
What happens after a property's been attached?
So after the property is attached, the next goal is to recover the dues.
Okay.
And they do that by selling the attached property.
Okay, so is that like a regular real estate sale or is it different?
It's a bit different.
How so?
It's designed to be very transparent
Okay,
and accessible.
got it.
So the main way they do it is through a public auction.
Okay,
Anyone can come and bid on the property.
so it's totally open.
Yes.
But what if nobody bids or if the bids are too low?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
And the manual has a plan for that.
what is it?
So the public option is the first choice,
Right.
but there are times when they might have to do a private sale.
Okay, when would that happen?
Well, maybe if the property is very unique,
Oh,
or if the public auction just didn't attract enough interest, the recovery officer can decide to sell it privately.
okay.
That way they can make sure they're getting a fair price for it.
So they've really thought of everything.
It seems that way.
But what about the defaulter?
Yeah.
Do they have any say at all at that point?
They do.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
The manual gives them a few chances to try and get their property back.
That's interesting. Tell me more.
So let's say someone wins the bid at the auction.
Okay.
It's not over for the original owner just yet.
What can they do?
Well, they have 30 days
Okay.
to try and reclaim their property.
Okay, so how do they do that?
They or anyone else who has a stake in the property can apply to have the sale set aside.
Okay.
But it's not as easy as it sounds.
I bet there are a lot of conditions.
Yeah, there are. Like what?
Well, to get the sale set aside,
Yeah.
they have to show they're serious about paying what they owe.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means they have to deposit the entire amount they owe.
The whole thing. Yeah, plus any interest that's built up, and even a penalty for the person who won the bid.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is.
It really shows how important it is to follow those Provident Fund rules.
Yeah. There are serious consequences for not complying.
It seems like every step of the way, this manual is trying to be fair
Yes.
to both the person who owes the money,
Right.
but also to make sure that the workers get what they deserve.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance.
This is fascinating. I'm really glad we're looking at this.
Me too.
It's way more interesting than I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's a really well thought out system.
It really is. It's not just about collecting money.
Nope.
It's about considering everyone involved.
Absolutely. It's about finding solutions that are fair for everyone.
Exactly.
And that focus on fairness goes even further.
Really? How so?
Well, they've got rules about when they can actually sell the property.
Oh, okay.
Like they can't hold a sale on a Sunday
Ah.
or a public holiday
Oh.
or even a local holiday.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have thought about that.
Yeah. Why is that? It's all about making sure the process is fair and that everyone has a chance to participate.
Okay, so by avoiding those specific days, they're making it more likely that more people can come to the auction.
Exactly.
So someone doesn't miss out just because of a religious holiday or something.
Right.
Okay, so it's about making it fair for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It's about transparency.
I like that.
So speaking of the auction,
Okay.
let's say someone wins the bid.
Yeah, what happens then?
Well, it's not just as simple as handing over the keys.
Oh, really?
The winning bidder actually has to put down a deposit,
How much?
25% of the total price.
Oh, wow.
And they have to do it right away.
Okay, so that shows they're serious.
Right. It's a guarantee that they're actually going to buy it.
Then what?
They have 15 days to pay the rest of the money.
Okay.
But if they don't,
What happens?
they lose their deposit.
Oh, wow.
And the property goes back up for auction.
Okay, so that keeps people from messing up the process.
Mm.
What about the original owner?
The defaulter.
Yeah. Can they do anything at this point?
They do have one last chance.
Really?
Yeah, they have 30 days to
Okay.
try and get their property back.
Oh, wow. So how can they do that?
Well, they or anyone else who has an interest in the property
Yeah.
can apply to have the sale canceled.
Canceled.
Yeah, set aside.
Okay, so they can just say they want it back and that's it.
Not exactly.
Or they have to do.
Well, they have to prove that they can actually pay what they owe.
Oh, so it's not just about wanting it back.
Right.
They have to show they're serious?
Exactly.
So how do they do that?
Well, they have to deposit the entire amount that's outstanding,
Wow.
including all the interest and any penalties.
That's a lot of money.
It is.
So it's a big decision for them.
Yeah, it really shows how important it is to take these Provident Fund requirements seriously.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not something you want to mess around with.
So it seems like at every step, the manual is trying to balance the rights of the person who owes money with the need to make sure the workers get what they're owed.
Yes, exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot.
And this is really interesting stuff.
It is.
We've been talking a lot about selling off existing property,
Right.
but you mentioned something before that really caught my attention.
What was that?
The recovery officer can actually appoint a receiver,
Yes,
and not just to manage a business, but to potentially create a whole new one.
that's right.
That's amazing. I'd love to hear more about that.
It's one of the more unique parts of this system.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
So let's say the person who owes the money owns a factory,
Okay.
but it's not being used.
Okay.
Now, they could just sell the factory as it is, but that might not get a very good price.
Yeah.
So instead, the recovery officer could appoint a receiver
Okay.
to actually start a new business in that factory.
Wow. So they're not just getting money from existing assets.
Right.
They're actually creating new sources of income. That's incredible. It's like they're turning lemons into lemonade.
And it is a very proactive approach.
Yeah.
And it's not just about getting the money that's owed. It's about making sure the workers get the benefits they're entitled to.
I really like that.
It's about finding creative solutions.
So is this only for businesses?
Not necessarily.
Oh, really?
Let's say they own a building
Okay.
and it's been attached.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just leaving it empty,
Yeah.
they could appoint a receiver to manage it.
Oh, okay.
Maybe rent it out or something.
So they make it generate income?
Exactly. It's about putting those assets to work.
So they're turning the defaulters' assets into little money-making machines
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
so they can pay back what they owe.
Right.
That's a really cool approach.
It is. It goes beyond just seizing and selling things.
Yeah. It's much more creative.
So what about the receiver themselves?
Yeah. Who are these people?
Well, choosing the right receiver is really important.
Okay.
It's a big responsibility. And the manual actually has a whole section on what makes a good receiver.
What kind of qualities are they looking for?
Well, first of all, they need someone who's competent.
Okay, so they know what they're doing.
Exactly.
Okay, what up?
And of course, they have to be trustworthy.
Right. So they can be trusted to manage things properly?
Yeah, it's a position with a lot of oversight.
So it's a high-pressure job.
It can be.
What are some of the things they have to do?
Well, the manual outlines a bunch of responsibilities.
Like what?
Things like providing some kind of security deposit
Okay.
and submitting regular reports on how things are going. And of course, they have to manage the property or the business responsibly.
So it's not just a free ride?
Nope. There are definitely consequences if they don't do their job properly.
Oh, like what?
Well, the recovery officer can hold them accountable for any money that's lost because of something they did wrong,
Oh, wow.
or if they were negligent.
Oh.
And in some cases, they can even go after the receiver's personal property.
Wow. So the receiver is on the hook too?
Yeah, they have to take it seriously.
That makes sense. It's not a position to be taken lightly.
It's not.
It really shows the importance of this whole process.
Yeah, and the need for everyone involved to be professional and responsible.
This has been so insightful.
Glad to hear it.
I thought this was going to be a boring manual.
Yeah.
But it's turned out to be so fascinating.
It is pretty interesting.
There's so much to think about.
There is.
It's not just about rules and procedures.
Right.
It's about people's lives and livelihood.
Exactly.
And the whole system is designed to be fair and effective.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a great example of a system that's trying to do things the right way.
So we've talked about a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah, we have.
Like what happens when they have to seize and sell assets.
All right.
And even this interesting idea of receivership.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens if the defaulter isn't just one person?
Okay.
Like what if it's a partnership that owes money?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, how does that work?
Partnerships definitely add another layer of complexity.
Right, because it's not just one individual.
Exactly.
So how does the manual handle that?
Well, it addresses partnerships specifically.
Okay, good.
It recognizes that in a partnership, you have shared ownership.
Right,
So what one partner does can affect everyone else.
that makes sense.
Right.
So if a partnership owes dues, how do they go about recovering that money?
Well, it's not as simple as just holding all the partners responsible.
Oh, really?
The manual actually takes a more focused approach.
Okay, how so?
Instead of going after the whole partnership,
Yeah.
they try to figure out which partner is actually the defaulter.
Oh, so they pinpoint the responsibility.
Exactly. It's about making sure that the consequences fall on the person who didn't meet their obligations.
So how do they figure out who's responsible within the partnership?
Well, that's where the recovery officer really has to do some investigating.
Okay.
They have to look at the partnership agreement,
Mm.
see what each partner's role and responsibilities are, and really understand what led to the dues not being paid.
So it's kind of like detective work.
It is, in a way.
They have to untangle the finances and the operations.
Exactly, to figure out who's ultimately at fault.
So once they figure out who the defaulter is, what happens then?
Well, the process is pretty similar to what we talked about before,
Okay,
but with a key difference.
with that.
They focus on attaching that specific partner's share of the partnership's assets and profits.
Okay, so they're not going after everything the partnership owns.
Right, they're just targeting the portion that belongs to the person who messed up.
That seems much fair.
It is. It protects the innocent partners from being punished.
And I assume they can also appoint a receiver in this situation.
Absolutely, they can.
Okay.
Just like with an individual defaulter,
Okay.
they can bring in a receiver to manage that attached share.
So someone's overseeing things and making sure that money gets recovered.
Exactly.
But what about the other partners? Are they just totally off the hook?
Well, they might still be worried about what happens to the partnership.
Yeah, for sure.
The manual takes that into consideration.
Okay, good.
It recognizes that the other partners might want to protect the partnership's assets and keep things running smoothly.
Makes sense.
So it gives them an option.
What's that?
They can actually buy back the defaulter's share.
Oh, wow.
They can step in and pay what's owed on behalf of their partner.
So they can bail them out, basically.
Yeah, you could say that.
That's interesting. So even though they're focusing on the individual, they're still giving the partnership a way to protect itself.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that partnerships are complicated
Right.
and that one person's actions can have a ripple effect.
So they're trying to minimize the damage.
Yeah, and keep things as fair as possible.
This is incredible. Honestly, this whole manual is amazing.
I know, right?
It's so well thought out.
It really is.
It's legally sound, but also surprisingly sensitive.
Yeah.
Like it understands how real businesses and relationships work. It's not just about blindly following rules.
It's about finding solutions that work for everyone.
It's a really great example of a system that's trying to do the right thing.
I think so too.
Well, this deep dive has been truly eye-opening.
I'm glad you found it interesting.
I really did. When we started, I thought it would be super dry,
Yeah,
but it's been so fascinating to see how this whole system works.
that's a pretty amazing system.
It really is.
It's clear that a lot of thought went into creating it.
For sure. They didn't miss a thing.
It's designed to be fair and effective.
And it's all about protecting workers' rights.
That's the most important part.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there,
Yeah,
maybe this has sparked your curiosity
that would be great.
about how these financial systems work.
It's a fascinating world.
It really is. Or maybe it's made you think about that balance
Yeah.
between making sure people follow the rules,
Right.
but also protecting their rights at the same time.
It's a tough balance.
It is. But no matter what, you take away from this.
Yeah.
I hope you've learned something new
Me too.
and that you have a new appreciation for how complex these systems really are.
They are definitely complex.
But they're also really important.
They are.
They keep our society functioning,
They do.
and they make sure that everyone is treated fairly.
Well said.
So keep exploring,
Always.
keep learning.
There's always something new to discover.
And until next time, keep diving.
Yeah, keep diving.
Welcome to our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're going to be tackling a topic that's pretty crucial for anyone involved in the Indian workforce.
Yeah.
Recovery of dues under the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1952.
Right.
Quite a mouthful, right?
It is.
We usually just call it the EPF and MP Act.
Yeah.
And you've provided us with a recovery manual,
Right.
legal circulars,
Yes.
court judgments,
Mhm.
and even references to external legal frameworks like the IBC.
Yeah.
It's like we're about to crack open a legal detective novel.
It is quite a bit of reading material.
Our goal today is to really equip you with the knowledge to confidently navigate this system.
Right.
So whether you're an employer diligently trying to stay compliant
Yeah.
or an employee wanting to understand how your retirement savings are protected,
Yes.
we're going to try to break it all down for you.
Exactly. It's about empowering you
Yeah.
with the information that you need, regardless of which side of the equation you're on.
Right.
Yeah.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of recovery procedures, let's kind of lay the foundation.
Sure.
Could you remind us about the fundamental purpose of the EPF and MP Act?
At its heart, it is a social security scheme.
Okay.
So it's aiming at providing financial security for employees after they retire.
Right.
And it's a mandatory program that requires contributions from both employers and employees.
Got it.
And those contributions accumulate over time
Yeah.
and form a retirement fund for the employee.
It's that safety net that
Exactly.
everyone hopes they'll never need but are grateful to have.
Precisely. And because it is a statutory obligation,
Yeah.
non-compliance carries serious consequences.
Right.
And this is where those robust recovery mechanisms we mentioned
Yeah.
come into play.
So let's imagine a scenario where an employer has failed to deposit the due contributions.
Okay.
What happens next? Who kicks off this recovery process?
So the Act designates an authorized officer for this very purpose. So this officer's role is to identify instances of outstanding dues
Right.
and initiate that recovery process.
Got it.
So think of them as the first line of defense in safeguarding employee funds.
So they're the ones waving the red flag, so to speak.
Exactly. Once the authorized officer identifies a default,
Okay.
they issue a formal document called a recovery certificate.
Okay.
And this certificate essentially triggers the involvement of another key player, the recovery officer.
Ah, the recovery officer.
Yeah.
It sounds almost like a character from a Western movie.
Well, they do wield significant legal power.
Okay.
You could think of them as a debt collector, but one with a court-backed mandate.
Right.
And the recovery certificate is their authority to proceed with recovery efforts.
I'm already sensing this is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of tools does this recovery officer have at their disposal?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's more than just sending a sternly worded letter.
You are absolutely right. It goes far beyond simple notices. While those do exist,
Yeah.
you'll find examples like Form EPSET1 in the materials you shared.
Yeah.
The recovery officer has access to a spectrum of actions,
Got it.
each escalating in severity.
So it's a step-by-step approach,
Exactly.
starting with gentler nudges
Yeah,
and escalating to more serious measures if needed.
precisely. One of the most powerful tools in their arsenal is the ability to attach and sell assets
Okay.
to recover the dues.
Got it.
And this isn't limited to just movable property like vehicles or equipment.
You mean they can go after immovable property too?
Exactly.
So things like land and buildings.
Yes.
Even the employer's office space.
Exactly. And that highlights the seriousness
Yeah.
with which the authorities treat non-compliance
Right.
with the EPF and MP Act. It's not just about fines or penalties. It's about ensuring that employees receive the funds they are entitled to.
That makes sense. It's about protecting those retirement savings no matter what.
Now, when it comes to the actual process of auctioning these assets,
Yeah.
Circular 1, Guidelines for Auction Sale of a Movable Property Attached, lays out the specific rules of the game.
So there's a defined process,
Exactly.
a set of regulations to ensure transparency and fairness
Yes.
in how these auctions are conducted.
It covers everything,
Okay.
from advertising the auction
Yeah.
to evaluating bids
Right.
to ensuring a level playing field for potential buyers.
Got it.
And it's not a static system either.
Good.
Circulars 2 and 3, issued in 2005, further clarify specific aspects and introduce additional safeguards to constantly refine the process.
So it sounds like they're constantly fine-tuning the system,
Oh, precisely.
making sure it's as effective as possible.
The goal is to maximize recovery.
Yeah.
While also upholding the principles of fairness and transparency throughout the process.
Right.
But attaching and selling assets is just one arrow in the recovery officer's quiver. They can also impose legal constraints
Interesting.
on the defaulter, limiting their ability to deal with their assets.
Okay, this sounds intriguing. What kind of constraints are we talking about here?
Imagine something called prohibitory orders.
Okay.
These orders, issued under forms like EPFCP3, EPFCP4, and EPFCP5, effectively restrict the defaulter from dealing with their assets.
Okay.
They can't sell them, transfer them,
Right.
or dispose of them until the dues are settled.
So it's like freezing their assets to prevent them from slipping away
That's a great way to put it.
before the dues are recovered.
And these orders can be very specific.
Okay.
Form EPFCP4, for instance, targets shares held by the defaulter.
Got it.
Form EPFCP8 can be used to attach salaries, and Form EPFCP11 can target partnership interests.
Wow. It really does seem like they have a tool for every scenario.
The goal is to be comprehensive
Yeah.
and ensure that no avenue for recovering the dues is left unexplored. And then, of course, in the most serious cases of noncompliance, there's the possibility of arrest and detention.
That definitely takes things to a whole new level.
It does.
It shows just how seriously
Yeah.
the authorities view the obligation to protect employee funds.
Forms EPFCP25, EPFCP26, and EPFCP27 are the instruments used for this purpose.
Okay.
But it's crucial to understand that even in such extreme situations, the Act incorporates safeguards
Okay.
to ensure that the defaulter is not unfairly treated.
That's reassuring to hear. What kind of safeguards are built into the system?
For starters, Section 7.E of the Recovery Manual
Okay.
clearly states that the defaulter has the right to review the recovery officer's orders
Got it.
so they can challenge the demand,
Right.
present their case, and seek a review of the decision.
So there's room for due process
Yes.
for ensuring that decisions aren't arbitrary or one-sided.
And Circular 8,
Yeah.
specifically the judgment in EPFO RPFC ERISA V's official liquidator, offers a great example of how these legal challenges can shape the recovery process.
What about situations where the defaulter might be facing genuine financial difficulties?
Right.
Is there any flexibility within the system to accommodate such cases?
Absolutely. Section 8E of the EPF and MP Act itself
Okay.
empowers the authorized officer to grant time for payment
Got it.
or even stay proceedings under certain circumstances.
Okay.
So this means they can temporarily halt the recovery process,
Right.
giving the defaulter some breathing room to address their financial situation.
That's good to know. It suggests that the system isn't entirely rigid
Exactly.
and acknowledges that real-life circumstances can
Yeah.
be complex.
And Circular 8,
Yeah.
especially the judgment regarding coercive actions during appeal periods, offers practical insights into how these stays operate.
Okay.
It underscores the balance the Act tries to strike
Right.
between protecting employee funds and recognizing potential hardships faced by defaulters.
It's about finding a solution that's fair to everyone involved.
Exactly.
And speaking of finding solutions,
Yeah.
are there provisions for alternative payment options?
Yes, absolutely.
Perhaps something that's less daunting than a massive lump sum payment.
Circulars 4, 5, 6, and 7 detail the possibility of negotiating installment payments.
Okay.
So this offers defaulters a structured way to repay the dues over time,
Right.
easing the financial burden and potentially improving the chances of full recovery.
So it's not always an all-or-nothing approach.
Precisely.
There's room for negotiation and finding a payment plan that works.
Circular 4 is particularly noteworthy here,
Okay.
as it allows for up to 72 installments.
Wow.
That's a significant amount of time,
Yeah.
demonstrating the flexibility within the system
Right.
to accommodate diverse financial situations.
That level of flexibility is impressive. Now, I'm guessing there are certain scenarios
Yes.
that complicate this recovery process even further.
Yeah.
What happens, for instance, if the defaulter passes away
Okay.
before the dues are settled?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
Section 7.D of the Recovery Manual explicitly states
Right.
that in such cases, the proceedings continue against the legal representative of the deceased.
So the obligation doesn't simply vanish, it's transferred to the estate
Exactly.
legal error.
It's about ensuring that the funds meant for employees are recovered,
Right.
even in challenging circumstances. Another complex scenario involves establishments
Okay.
that are under liquidation or going through proceedings under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, or IBC.
The IBC. That always adds another layer of complexity
It does.
to any financial matter.
Section 7.J of the Recovery Manual provides some clarity on this,
Okay.
highlighting how the recovery process needs to navigate the provisions of both the EPF and MP Act
Right.
and the IBC.
So there's a potential conflict of priorities. You have the EPF Act trying to recover dues
Precisely.
for employees. And then you have the IBC,
Yeah.
which also has its own set of priorities for distributing assets
Exactly.
during insolvency.
And in these situations, it becomes crucial to understand the interplay between these two legal frameworks,
Right.
which can get quite intricate. There's also the concept of surety to consider.
Surety.
Yeah.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
It's essentially a guarantee
Okay.
provided by a third party for the defaulter's obligation.
Got it.
Section 7.F of the Recovery Manual explained how the surety can be held responsible
Right.
for the defaulter's dues if the defaulter fails to pay.
So it's like having a backup payer.
You could think of it that way.
Someone who steps in
Yes.
if the primary debtor can't fulfill their obligations.
It adds another layer of security for the fund,
Right.
ensuring that employee contributions are protected, even if the employer defaults.
I'm already starting to grasp just how complex this whole process can be.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating web of regulations and procedures and safeguards.
It certainly is. But by unraveling these intricacies,
Yeah.
we gain a deeper understanding
Right.
of how the EPF and MP Act seeks to strike a balance.
Right.
It's about protecting the interests of employees, ensuring the financial integrity of the fund,
All right.
and also providing a fair and transparent process
Yeah.
for all parties involved.
That balance seems to be a recurring theme here. It's not just about blindly pursuing recovery at all costs.
Exactly.
It's about considering the various nuances and complexities that come into play in real-world scenarios.
And as we delve deeper into the specific circulars and court judgments
Yeah.
in the following parts of this deep dive,
Okay.
that balance will become even more apparent. But
Yeah.
for now,
Yeah.
I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding the fundamental principles and tools
Yeah.
involved in the recovery process under the EPF and MP Act.
Absolutely. We've journeyed from the initial identification of outstanding dues
Right.
to the issuance of the recovery certificate, explored the arsenal of tools at the recovery officer's disposal,
Yeah.
and uncovered the safeguards embedded in the system to ensure fairness.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
Indeed. In part 2 of this deep dive,
Yes.
we'll be examining those circulars in detail, dissecting the specific guidelines and judgments
Yeah.
that shape the recovery process.
We'll also touch upon some fascinating real-world case studies,
Okay.
showcasing how these procedures play out in specific situations.
It's like we're putting on our detective hats
Precisely.
and getting ready to analyze the evidence.
Join us for the next part of our journey
Yeah.
into the intricacies of EPF and MP Act recoveries.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the complexities of EPF and MP Act recoveries.
I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and dig into those circulars.
These circulars offer a treasure trove of practical insights,
Yeah.
guiding us through the real-world application of the Act's provisions.
Okay.
Let's start with the ones focused on auctions.
A crucial tool for the recovery officer.
Auctions always have an air of drama to them.
They do, and Circular 1,
Yeah.
Guidelines for Auction Sale of Movable Property Attached, sets the stage for a transparent and fair process.
Okay.
It's like a rule book, ensuring that everything from advertising to evaluating bids
Yeah.
is conducted properly.
So it's not a chaotic free-for-all.
Exactly.
There's a system in place to protect the interests of all parties involved.
Absolutely. The authorities aim to maximize recovery while ensuring that the auction process itself is above board.
Yeah.
And just as we discussed earlier,
Okay.
Circulars 2 and 3 build upon these guidelines, further refining procedures for both movable and immovable properties.
So they're constantly tweaking the system.
That's right.
Learning from experience and making it more robust.
It's a dynamic process.
Yeah.
Adapting to new challenges and ensuring effectiveness.
Okay.
Now let's shift gears to those circulars that address installment payments.
Right.
A bit of relief
Yeah.
for defaulters facing financial constraints.
Installment's a welcome option for many, I'm sure.
It is.
Circular 4 caught my eye earlier.
Okay.
It grants up to 72 installments. That's 6 years.
It is, and that speaks volumes about the system's understanding
Right.
that demanding immediate lump sum payments
Yeah.
can be counterproductive.
Right.
It could even hinder recovery in the long run.
It's like recognizing that sometimes a more flexible approach can lead to better outcomes.
Circulars 5 and 6 go deeper, outlining the criteria and procedures for granting installments.
Okay.
There's a system in place to evaluate requests
Got it.
and ensure that these provisions are used responsibly.
Checks and balances to prevent misuse,
Yeah.
which makes sense.
And then there's Circular 7,
Yeah.
which streamlines the process by delegating authority for granting installments to specific officers. This can significantly expedite things for defaulters.
Efficiency and flexibility, a winning combination.
Exactly.
Now, those circulars dealing with court judgments,
Right.
those are particularly insightful, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
They offer glimpses into real-world legal battles
Okay.
and how they shape the recovery process.
Right.
Circular 8, for example,
Yeah.
features the judgment in EPFO RPFC, ERISA View's official liquidator.
I remember that one. It dealt with coercive actions
Yes.
during appeal periods.
It clarified that actions like attachment or arrest cannot be taken while an appeal is pending.
Right.
It upholds the principles of due process,
Right.
ensuring that defaulters have a fair chance
Yeah.
to challenge the demands against them.
So it acts as a check
Precisely.
on the recovery officer's authority.
And Circular 8 also includes a more recent judgment from March 2022,
Okay.
further clarifying the limitations on coercive actions during appeals. It's an area where the law is constantly being refined
Right.
through judicial interpretation.
It shows how the system evolves
Exactly.
to ensure fairness and balance.
Now, Circular 9
Okay.
introduces another landmark judgment, this time from the Supreme Court, in the case of EPFO versus OL of SK Pharmaceuticals Limited.
That one involved the recovery of dues
You do.
from an establishment undergoing liquidation, if I recall correctly.
The Supreme Court's decision clarified the interplay between the EPF and MP Act
Right.
and the IBC, establishing a hierarchy of claims in such cases.
It provided much-needed clarity
Exactly.
on handling insolvency situations. This seems like a recurring theme,
It is.
navigating the intersection of the EPF and MP Act
Yeah.
with other legal frameworks.
And these judgments,
Right.
as highlighted in the circulars,
Yeah.
demonstrate the vital role of the judiciary
Right.
in shaping the recovery process.
They also showcase the dynamic nature of the law. It's
Yeah.
always adapting to new challenges.
Now let's delve into the circulars
Okay.
that specifically address the recovery of dues. Circular 10, Recovery of Arrear Dues, sets the tone with general guidelines.
It's like a call to action,
Exactly.
emphasizing proactive measures to recover outstanding dues.
It urges field offices to be diligent in pursuing these cases,
Right.
recognizing the importance of safeguarding the fund's integrity.
Delays can have a ripple effect impacting the fund's ability to fulfill its obligations.
Precisely. And Circular 11,
Okay.
Prompt recovery of current and arrear dues and initiation of action, therefore, reiterates this message, stressing the need for swift action.
Time is of the essence when it comes to recovering these funds.
Circular 12, with its rather long title, Arrangements for Smooth Exercise of Powers under Sections 7A, 7B, 7C, 14B of the EPF and MPACT, 1952 Administrative Scrutiny of the Orders Instructions Reg,
What?
focuses on procedural aspects.
I see. It outlines the steps involved
Exactly.
in initiating and reviewing recovery actions, ensuring consistency and accountability.
Circular 13,
Okay.
also titled Recovery of Arrear Dues,
Okay.
provides specific guidance on prioritizing recovery efforts,
Right.
particularly in cases involving substantial sums or chronic defaulters.
A strategic approach focusing resources where they'll have the greatest impact.
And finally, Circular 14,
Okay.
regarding cost of recovery, including cost of litigation,
Right.
brings to light the financial aspect of the recovery process.
This one caught my attention earlier.
Yeah,
It's easy to overlook the costs associated with these efforts.
it is, but tracking and managing those costs,
Yeah.
including legal expenses,
Right.
is crucial.
Mhm.
If recovery costs become excessive,
Yeah.
it can undermine the system's effectiveness.
It's a balancing act,
Precisely.
ensuring that the process is robust enough to deter non-compliance while remaining cost-effective.
These circulars taken together
Yeah.
paint a comprehensive picture
Right.
of the practical considerations involved in recovering dues
Yeah.
under the EPF and MP Act.
It's like a behind-the-scenes look at how this system operates in the real world.
Indeed. And in the final part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
we'll explore some intriguing case studies
Okay.
that illustrate how these procedures play out
Right.
in specific situations, showcasing the human element behind these legal complexities.
I'm eager to see how the theory translates into practice.
Exactly.
It's like watching those courtroom dramas unfold, but with real-world consequences.
Stay tuned for the final chapter of our EPF and MP Act recovery saga.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of EPF and MP Act recoveries.
I'm excited to see how all these regulations and procedures actually play out, in the real world.
These case studies offer fascinating glimpses into the complexities and nuances that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
They'll demonstrate how the recovery process kind of adapts to different challenges.
Let's start with a scenario that unfortunately isn't uncommon: the death of a defaulter.
Okay.
It's a sensitive situation, but the Act provides clear guidance.
Yeah.
Section 7.d of the Recovery Manual outlines the procedures,
Right.
emphasizing that proceedings don't simply cease.
So the obligation doesn't just disappear. What happens to the outstanding dues?
The responsibility shifts
Okay.
to the legal representative of the deceased.
Okay.
This could be an heir,
Right,
an
right.
executor,
Right.
or someone appointed by the court.
It ensures continuity
Exactly.
and upholds the principle of financial accountability.
It's about safeguarding the integrity of the fund,
Right.
ensuring that the benefits intended for employees are protected,
Yeah.
even in such circumstances.
Now, what about those situations where an establishment is facing liquidation
Right.
or proceedings under the IBC? Those always seem incredibly complex.
They are. Section 7.j of the manual provides some guidance
Okay.
on how the recovery process interacts with the IBC. But it's a delicate balancing act.
So it's not just about pursuing EPF dues in isolation.
Exactly.
There's a broader legal context to consider.
Imagine a scenario where a company owes outstanding EPF contributions,
Okay.
but also has debts to secured creditors and other stakeholders.
Right.
Determining the order of priority for repayment
Yeah.
can become a real legal puzzle.
It's like a game of financial chess with multiple players vying for their share.
And that's where expert legal counsel becomes indispensable.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we have valuable precedents to guide us.
Okay.
Circular 9, which we discussed earlier, highlights the Supreme Court judgment in EPFO versus OL of SK Pharmaceuticals Limited. This case offers crucial guidance on handling these complex scenarios,
Right.
ensuring that the EPF's interests are protected while respecting the principles of insolvency law.
So there's a hierarchy of claims, a
Exactly.
pecking order determined by the courts.
It ensures a fair and systematic approach to distributing assets during insolvency.
For our final case study, let's kind of delve into the concept of surety in action.
Surety. It's a powerful tool in the recovery officer's arsenal,
Yeah.
but it also comes with significant responsibility.
It's like a safety net for the EPF, but also a potential burden for the surety.
Precisely. Let's say a small business owner secures a loan,
Right.
and a friend or family member,
Right.
trusting in their success,
Yeah.
agrees to act as surety for EPF payments.
It's a gesture of support,
Yeah.
but what happens if the business falters and defaults on those payments?
Well, that's where the surety's obligation kicks in.
Okay.
Section 7.f of the manual explains how the authorities can pursue recovery from the surety if the primary defaulter fails to pay.
So it's not just a symbolic gesture.
Exactly.
It's a legally binding commitment.
Potential sureties
Yeah.
need to fully understand the implications
Right.
before agreeing to such an arrangement.
It highlights the importance of seeking legal advice
Absolutely.
and carefully weighing the risks involved.
I couldn't agree more. These case studies, I hope, have provided a glimpse into the real-world implications of the EPF and MP Act and its recovery mechanisms.
They've certainly been eye-opening.
Good.
It's amazing how a seemingly straightforward concept
Yeah.
like recovering dues can involve such a complex interplay of regulations and procedures,
Right.
and human stories.
The key takeaway here is that understanding these intricacies is crucial for both employers and employees.
Right.
Employers need to ensure full compliance, not only to avoid penalties, but also to uphold their ethical responsibility to their workforce.
And employees need to be aware of the mechanisms
Exactly.
protecting their hard-earned retirement savings.
This knowledge empowers everyone involved to
Yeah.
navigate the system effectively and ensure fairness for all parties.
Well, this deep dive has been a fascinating journey.
It has.
From the foundational principles of the EPF and MP Act
Yes.
to the nuanced details of recovery procedures and the human element behind these legal complexities.
Right.
We've explored the tools and the safeguards and the real-world challenges that shape this system.
Remember, this is just the beginning.
Right.
There's always more to learn and explore. Stay curious, ask questions, and never stop seeking knowledge.
We hope this deep dive has empowered you with a deeper understanding of the EPF and MP Act
Absolutely.
and its role in safeguarding the financial security of India's workforce.
Until next time, stay informed and keep diving deep into the fascinating world of knowledge.
All right, so today we're diving deep into something that's, well, a little dense.
Definitely not light reading.
Yeah, the recovery manual used by the Employees Provident Fund organization here in India. We had a listener request to break this down, figure out just how the EPFO makes sure employers contribute to those provident funds, and, what happens if they don't.
It's an important system. A lot of people depend on those funds.
Exactly. So before we get lost in all the details of the current manual, can we talk a little history? The EPFO didn't always have this separate system for getting those funds back, did they?
You're right. It used to be tied to the state governments. They collected it almost like it was part of land revenue.
Wow. So, imagine all the potential delays and inconsistencies.
Exactly. It just wasn't working. Especially for the employees who need that money, delays could be a huge problem. So in 1988, they changed things up, amended the EPF Act, and created the recovery officer role.
So now someone at the EPFO was specifically in charge of making sure those funds were recovered.
Right. But it took a while to roll out nationwide. It wasn't until 1997 that all the regional commissioners and their assistants had this authority.
I guess it takes time to build out a whole new system across the entire country. So did they also create some kind of central body to, oversee it all?
Yeah, they realized they needed that. So they created the recovery division at the EPFO head office. They set the strategy, make sure everything's running consistently across all the regions.
Okay, so we've got this dedicated division, these recovery officers. Sounds very official. But what can they actually do? What kind of power do these recovery officers have?
A lot, actually. They can attach and sell property, appoint a receiver to manage a business, even arrest someone in some cases.
Whoa, okay. That's some serious authority. But I'm guessing there are a lot of rules to prevent things from getting, out of hand.
Oh, definitely. The recovery manual lays it all out. Everything has to be done legally, by the book, following due process.
So no seizing assets just because you feel like it. What legal framework do these officers have to work within?
It's actually pretty complex. They've got to be familiar with the EPF Act, of course, but also parts of the Income Tax Act and even the Code of Civil Procedure.
Wow. That's not just knowing the rules about EPF. That's knowing the whole legal system. Makes sense, though, when you're dealing with people's finances and property. Now, I noticed the manual also talks about enforcement officers. What's their role?
Think of them like the boots on the ground. They're the ones who go out and actually help the recovery officer do all these things.
So, serving notices, gathering info on the defaulter's assets, even physically attaching property? Sounds pretty hands-on.
It is. It's all about being thorough, making sure everything's done right and documented.
Yeah, documentation. The manual seems to emphasize that a lot. Why is that so crucial?
Transparency and accountability. We're talking about people's money here. It's serious business. The EPFO has to show that every action is documented, that it's justified and done according to the rules.
Makes sense. Now, this attachment process, I'm guessing our listeners are curious about that. What exactly can they seize and what's off limits?
Well, the manual separates things into movable and immovable property. Movable is stuff like vehicles, equipment, even things like stocks and bonds. Basically, anything that can be moved or transferred.
Okay, so things that could be sold to get the money back. What about immovable property?
That's things that are fixed in place land, buildings, that sort of thing.
So if they find, say, some movable property belonging to the employer, how do they go about attaching it?
They start with a warrant, which is basically a legal document authorizing the attachment. The enforcement officer gives a copy to the defaulter, and if the payment's still not made, they physically seize the property.
And what if it's something big, like a piece of equipment that can't be easily moved?
Even then, they have ways to secure it, maybe literally securing it on site or restricting its use. The goal is to stop the defaulter from getting rid of it while this whole process is going on.
Wow, they thought of everything. So what about immovable property? How's that different?
It also starts with an order that says they can't sell or transfer the property. But with immovable property, they also have to make a public proclamation about the attachment.
Public proclamation. So it's not enough to just tell the defaulter. Everyone needs to know.
Right. It's like a legal notice to everyone, basically saying, this property is now under the control of the EPFO, stops anyone from trying to buy it without knowing what's going on.
Okay, so they attach the property, but the goal is to recover the money, right? So how does the actual sale work?
Usually it's a public auction. Anyone can bid on the attached property.
And I'm assuming there are rules about how these auctions work to keep things fair.
Of course. Lots of procedures to make sure everything's transparent and above board. For instance, the recovery officer sets a minimum price, so it can't be sold for some ridiculously low amount.
So it's not about making a profit, it's about getting a fair price to cover the money owed. What happens if they actually sell it for more than what's owed?
Any extra money, after they cover the debt and any costs, goes back to the defaulter. It's not about punishing them. It's about recovering what's rightfully owed.
Right. Makes sense. Now, I know we mentioned earlier that a defaulter can challenge the sale legally. How would they do that?
If they think something wasn't done right or that their rights were violated, they can go to court.
So there's a system of checks and balances throughout this whole process. Okay, we've covered a lot here, from notices to attaching and selling property. It's a complex system.
Yeah, we've gone over some of the main mechanisms, but there's still more to uncover.
Like appointing a receiver. That sounds interesting.
Definitely. And of course, there's the question of what happens if it escalates to the point of an arrest.
Well, it sounds like there's even more to this deep dive. But for now, we'll let our listener digest all this information.
Sounds good. It's a lot to take in.
We'll be back soon to dive into those other aspects of the EPFO Recovery Manual.
Looking forward to it.
So this new manual, it really seems like the EPFO is taking this recovery process seriously.
Yeah, they want to make sure it's efficient, transparent, fair for everyone involved.
Right. Now, you mentioned that the manual kind of walks us through each step. So let's say an employer, they realize they've missed some payments. What's the first thing that happens?
Well, the first formal step is they get a notice from the EPFO, not just a reminder, like a real official document. They call it EPFCP1.
Okay, so this is where things get real. What's in this notice?
It tells them exactly how much they owe, includes any interest that's added on, and it gives them a deadline to pay up, usually about 15 days.
So a chance to make things right before things get more serious. What if they just ignore the notice? Well, they can't pay.
Then the recovery officer has a bunch of options to try and get that money back. That's where the manual gets pretty detailed.
Okay, so it's like a toolbox of different ways to enforce these rules. We've talked about attachment of property as one of those options. Can you explain what that means?
Basically, it's seizing assets to make sure the EPFO gets paid.
Makes sense, but I'm sure it's not as easy as just taking anything they want, right?
Definitely not. The manual's very clear about what they can and can't attach. They break it down into movable and immovable property.
Movable, meaning?
Things they can, move, vehicles, equipment, machinery, even financial stuff like stocks or bonds, anything that can be taken or transferred.
Stuff that they can sell to recover the debt. Okay, so what about immovable property?
That's stuff that's, stuck in place, land, buildings, things like that.
All right, so let's say they find some movable property. What's the process for actually attaching it?
First, they issue a warrant. That's the legal go-ahead to do it. The enforcement officer, they serve a copy to the defaulter. If they still don't pay up, they can physically seize the property.
So they literally take it. What if it's like a huge piece of equipment, something they can't just load onto a truck?
They can still secure it in some way, maybe physically locking it down or saying it can't be used. The important thing is stopping the defaulter from selling it or getting rid of it.
Wow. So they've thought of every scenario. What about immovable property? How do they attach that?
They start with an order saying the owner can't sell or transfer it. But with immovable property, they also have to make a public announcement about it.
A public announcement. Why?
It's a legal notice. Everyone knows that the property is now under EPFO control. That way, nobody tries to buy it without knowing what's going on.
Right, so it protects everyone involved. Okay, so they attach the property, but ultimately they want the money, right?
Yeah.
How does the sale work?
They usually do it through a public auction. Anyone can come and bid on the property.
And there are rules to make sure those auctions are fair. Right?
Oh, yeah. The recovery officer sets a minimum price, so it can't be sold for too little. It has to be a fair price, reflecting what it's actually worth.
So the goal is to recover the funds, not to, make a huge profit off of this. What happens if the sale brings in more money than what's owed?
Any extra money, after covering the debt and any costs, goes back to the defaulter. The point is to get what's owed, not to punish them.
That's good to know. It's about fairness. Now, we talked about defaulters being able to challenge the sale legally. How do they do that?
If they think something was wrong with the sale or that their rights were violated, they can go to court.
Okay, so there's always that legal recourse if they need it.
Yeah.
We've done over a lot here, from notices to attaching and even selling property. It's definitely complicated.
It is, and there's still more to explore.
Like the whole thing about appointing a receiver.
Yeah. And then there's the question of, what happens if it gets to the point of actually arresting someone?
Sounds like we have a lot more to cover in this deep dive.
Definitely. It's a fascinating look at how the EPFO makes sure employees get the money they're owed.
Right, we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
But hopefully our listener is starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Absolutely. And how seriously the EPFO takes its role in protecting those funds.
Welcome back. We're still digging into this EPFO recovery manual. It's pretty fascinating, actually.
Yeah, it's more than just like a bunch of rules. It really shows how committed they are to getting employees the money they're owed.
Right. Now, before the break, we were talking about some of the stronger actions the EPFO can take, like arresting a defaulter. That seems pretty serious.
It is. It's not something they do lightly. They only use that power in very specific situations.
So it's not like you miss a payment and you're going to jail. What has to happen for someone to actually get arrested?
Well, first, the recovery officer has to follow a legal process. It starts with what they call a notice to show cause.
Okay, so even then, there's due process.
Yep.
What is a notice to show cause?
Basically, it gives the defaulter a chance to explain why they haven't paid. Are there good reasons? Maybe they have proof they're going through a tough time, or there's some special situation.
So they can make their case, show evidence if they have it. What happens if the recovery officer isn't convinced?
If they think the defaulter is just trying to avoid paying or hiding assets, then they can issue a warrant for arrest.
And then they're actually taken into custody. What happens then?
Usually, they'd be held in civil prison. But even then, the manual says they have to make sure the person's okay.
So it's not just about punishing them. They still have rights. What kind of safeguards are there?
For example, if someone gets really sick, they can be released. And there are rules about when they can arrest someone, like they can't do it in the middle of the night.
Okay, so even in that situation, the EPFO wants to make sure it's fair and humane. One thing we keep coming back to is this idea of record keeping. The manual really stresses how important that is. Why?
Transparency and accountability. It's all about showing that everything's done by the book every step of the way. That's where the registers come in.
The manual talks a lot about those registers. Right?
Oh yeah, there's a register for practically everything. One for tracking each case, one for property that's been attached and sold. They've got a collection and execution register, a cash register, even an installments register.
So they don't just do the work, they write it all down.
Exactly. It keeps everything organized, consistent. Anyone can see exactly what happened and why.
Makes sense. It builds trust in the system, especially when you're talking about people's money. Now, I noticed the manual also mentions these circulars. What are those all about?
Think of them like updates or clarifications. Laws change, procedures get tweaked, so the EPFO issues these circulars to give more specific instructions.
So if there's something in the manual that needs more explanation, they put out a circular.
Yeah, like maybe a circular about how exactly the auction process works or what the rules are for payment plans.
So it keeps everything up to date, make sure everyone's on the same page.
Right. It can get complicated, so those circulars are important.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything in this EPFO recovery manual. It's been a journey.
It has. Really makes you appreciate all the work that goes into making sure this system functions properly.
Yeah. It's more than just a bunch of rules. It's about protecting people's hard-earned money and doing it in a way that's fair and transparent.
Absolutely. It's about making sure employees get what they're entitled to.
We've just scratched the surface, but hopefully our listener has a much better understanding of how this whole recovery process works now.
Definitely. It's a system that impacts a lot of people, so it's good to know how it all works.
And as always, if you have any other topics you want us to deep dive into, let us know. We love exploring these complex, fascinating worlds with you.
Absolutely. There's always more to learn.
So until next time, keep those requests coming. Thanks for listening.